The mobile devices be turned off or put to silent. I notice that there are 3 leave of absences tonight, Alderman Sexton, Alderman Thomas and Councillor Sherlock. Otherwise everyone is present. Alderman Zuko isn't, but maybe coming a bit later. Or online.
Lord Mayor, I spoke to him earlier today and he indicated to me that he was unwell, so I'm not sure if that was...
Leave of absence maybe later.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that was transmitted to...
Maybe an apology at this stage. So leave apology at this stage. So I'd like to start with an acknowledgement to country that in recognition of the deep history and culture of this place, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land upon which we're meeting and acknowledge the Palawa people of Tasmania, the contemporary Aboriginal community, and acknowledge that they have survived invasion and dispossession and continue to maintain their identity, culture and rights. The minutes of our last meeting, 27th of June, moved by Deputy Lord Mayor, seconded by Alderman Barakas. All those in favour say aye. Against say no. Carried unanimously. Transfer of agenda items. Are there any items proposed for the open or close that anyone would like to move to a different part of the agenda? There being none. Notification of council workshops. There was one on the 5th of July on the caretaker policy, which is on the agenda tonight, and there were 5 elected members in attendance. Public question time. We do have a public question time that we've been given notice of from Mr. Nathan Wolf. Sorry, Mr. Wolf, if you'd like to come forward and ask your question.
Thank you, Chair. Hello, Council. Thank you for your time today. Watching the council meetings on the City of Hobart YouTube channel has become a regular routine for me. However, as a person with disabilities, one of which is hearing loss, the audio levels of these meetings are so quiet that I have to have my headphones at full volume, and at times I still struggle to understand the elected member who is speaking. I'm often privy to the following: elected members filling up glasses of water, receiving emails or texts, or even those seated making distracting noises just when their chairs are being shifted. At a previous council meeting, I asked a question regarding members interjecting in a disrespectful manner. I believe my question this evening correlates to that one, as those who are interrupting tend to be more audible than the speaker. The standing order state they shouldn't be speaking at all. This behaviour is so frequent I notice points of order are often not raised. So my question is in 3 parts. Will this council listen to my and others' feedback and bring this chamber into the 21st century with higher quality microphones and cameras? As the audio within the chamber's public area is also poor, could there be audio improvements there as well? I would also ask, is it possible for those who do not have the floor to have the ability to mute themselves for the convenience and clarity of all listeners? I'm happy to provide suggestions should the council deem that appropriate. I thank you all for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Wolf. We have received feedback similar to your own on the audio system in the council chamber, and I think everyone around the table would like to ensure that we do have an improved system. The advice I've received from the CEO is that we are actively pursuing improvements to it. The system was originally installed, the microphones at the levels they are was installed as an audio system only. However, since COVID, the inclusion, and it was actually before COVID we started doing the videos as well, but it's now very clear that it's not adequate, and the longer term work is being explored. So while that's being explored, there are incremental improvements being made where they can occur, and the suggestions that you have been made have been noted and will be considered as part of improvements to the system in the council chamber. So thank you for contributing to raising awareness about the challenges. It's certainly on our agenda, and the CEO is working to make improvements. Thank you.
Lord Mayor, before we continue, there's a query from the member of the public whether the YouTube streaming is happening.
I'm not sure at this stage. I think they were still getting it online. Let's see what's happening.
Thank you.
Not at this stage.
So we're still being recorded though, are we? And then if later on, yeah.
Yes,
Thank you.
That's right. Public questions. I think Ms. Elliott, sorry, I did hear Mr. Merridge also want to ask a question. That's right, you're first. You're up first, so go ahead.
So I have a pretty straightforward question for you, Lord Mayor. Is it true that you received $5,000 in political donations from Glenn Aldous and his partner, and that this is the same Glenn Aldous who is estate manager for Beam e-scooters?
Thank you, Ms. Elliott. Look, I'd like to just start by saying that it's the election campaign has well and truly started, and it's very clear that as part of your campaign you are keen to try and draw people down and make exaggerated claims. I have heard from various outlets that this particular imputation has been shopped around to various media outlets in the last few weeks, and you're trying to get something published. And I think it's rather unfortunate that you've chosen to bring this into the chamber. It is clearly part of your political campaign. For the record, I was the only candidate in the 2018 election that actually published my donations. Nobody else did. And I'd challenge you to publish your donations at this campaign as well. A private citizen did donate to my campaign, Glenn Aldous, as you have mentioned. 4 years later, I think it was in March 2022, Mr. Aldous became an employee of the scooter company that you're talking about. So there's actually no correlation between the donation and the scooter company, and I really reject the kind of imputations that you're trying to make through this question. Thanks, Ms. Elliott.
So did you vote on the e-scooter report in June though, given that conflict?
I beg your pardon?
There was an e-scooter vote in June.
Look, I've answered your question and I find your imputations and facts incorrect. There has been no commercial decision made about...
Point of order, Lord Mayor.
Excuse me. What's your point of order?
Well, she's asked a question. There was no imputations made, so it's a bit, you're misrepresenting the question.
No, Alderman Brackus. It is my choice to answer the question how I'd like to, and the imputations being made is one of wrongdoing, which I reject.
Simple question to me.
I asked a straightforward question.
There's a lot of politics going on in this chamber right now.
So is it
what
true?
I will say to you, Ms. Elliott...
So the answer to the question is yes, it is the same Glenn Aldous. Yes.
I've already explained to you,
Thank you, Lord
Elliott.
Mayor.
Thank you for your very... the political campaign has clearly started.
I thought it was a straightforward question.
Mr. Merridge, do you have a question as well?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I wasn't sure whether I could ask it. You probably tell me when I asked it whether I should or should not have asked the question. Much more simple one. The aldermen and councillors, I wrote to them today suggesting the council might like to consider, I hope, that by taking the rental of a house that's rented to a affordable rental conditions, that it would cost the council $660 a week to subsidise 10 rentals for family type homes as opposed to the current push to try and get family homes more available by not having so many Airbnb applications. I think my letter was fairly clear, but as you've asked me to ask a question, I hope you don't mind.
Thank you, Mr. Major. Look, I understand that under our standing orders, it's not possible to ask a question on an item that is on the agenda, and the short stay matter is on the agenda, so I'm not able to accept your question tonight.
Thank you. Understood.
Okay, petitions. Are there any petitions?
No, Lord Mayor.
Supplementary items, I don't think there are any. Are there any indications of pecuniary or conflicts of interest?
Lord Mayor, if I may, we do have an apology from Alderman Zuko.
An apology from Alderman Zuko. So just a reminder that a pecuniary or conflict of interest is where you would perceive to have a financial gain or benefit if a matter was decided in any particular way. So if there's any indications of pecuniary or conflicts of interest? There being none, we will move on to the acting as a planning authority, and I'll ask Deputy Lord Mayor to introduce item 8.1.
I have it as 9.1, but acting as part of the considerations under the City of Hobart Interim Planning Scheme, 816 Sandy Bay Road, Sandy Bay and Common Land, parent title, change of use to visitor accommodation. Lord Mayor, this was discussed...
That was seconded by Alderman Barakis, by the way.
I'll move that. And Lord Mayor, this item was discussed at committee at length. We had a number of deputations in relation to this, and you might remember that it was adjacent to an application for short stay accommodation to a property also quite close to this. The recommendation by officers is for refusal, but there was significant support sorry, it's for approval. Did I say that? Sorry. Recommended for approval, subject to, I think, one condition or a number of conditions, but the committee felt quite strongly, based on a lot of the information that came through from the deputations and the lack of residential amenity, which seems to be consistent with this property as a short stay, acting as a short stay accommodation place. So the committee recommended for reasons for refusal. So I strongly support this, feel that this is something that really is a real example of where residential amenity can be so interrupted by some short stay accommodation, not all short stay accommodation scenarios, but certainly this seems to be a prime example.
Any further discussion?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Lord Mayor, I know there's a few items regarding short stay on the agenda tonight, and we'll probably have a bit of argy-bargy about some of them. On this one, the planning committee was united in their position on this. While it was recommended for approval, it was pretty clear to see the what was going on this particular application at this particular site. One only needs to look at Google Earth and see what the layout of this house was. And to hear from the deputations that it was clearly a party house. I know one of the reasons for refusal in the on many of these short stay items is the likelihood of speculation of increased noise, and it's one that I often find unfair or unreasonable. But in this particular instance, I don't think it's a speculation or a likelihood. I think it's something that's already been realised. And whilst I know this particular item's gotten a fair bit of media attention, it is important. I think it's good that nobody has yet reflected on the owner, but the application itself, I think, on its own merits, isn't appropriate for the surrounding area. So I'd support the deputy on this.
Any further discussion? No discussion. I'll put that. All those in favour say aye.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry, Councillor Dutta.
Thank you, Chair. Now, this particular application, as stated, was recommended by staff, and I had asked a question if the set of facts and evidence presented to us was the same given to the staff, or they had the same evidence, and on that basis they made a different judgment, a different call, a different decision, and we as elected members unanimously made a different decision. So I am very pleased that we have that right to make decisions against the staff when the elected members are able to use their judgment, discretion, and facts and evidence and interpret otherwise. Thank you.
Councillor Dutta. No further discussion. I'll put that. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against say no. Carried unanimously. Item 9.2, 18 Grosvenor Street.
Yes, this is another application for visitor accommodation. The committee was voted 3-all on this item, so I'll move for refusal based on parking and access as to open. So I'll move that.
Seconded by Councillor Fox.
Again, Lord Mayor, it's like we didn't have representations, but we know full well that there are considerable considerations, particularly in this area, for parking and movement in relation to this. There is no parking on site for this visitor accommodation. So that in itself will have an impact on residents close by. It's again the concerns that are often raised in relation to the impacts on neighbourhoods with this type of application.
Further discussion? Councillor Coates.
Thank you. Just very quickly, I guess I'll foreshadow. In reading the officer's recommendations and analysis, and look, keeping in mind Councillor Dutta's points, where we are given contrary evidence, where we receive deputations, where we receive members of the public, concerned neighbours, providing us with the evidence of what's happening on the ground, it is entirely within our discretion and power to be able to make judgments and calls. In this instance, we haven't got that. What we have is a professional report that's written by experts in applying the current planning laws to ultimately what is a site down at Gossamer Street. I don't see any reason, I don't share the concerns in regards to the car parking in the amenity. The irony of this place being, because it's a shared cottage with another lot of shared units, if it was literally, you know, the person next door who owned it, on my reading of the site, it would actually be just a part house going out. It does talk about this place having separate access. There would be it's a very limited site. It's really only a studio. It's not one where we're going to have concerns about there being huge parties or 10 or 20 people staying overnight. It is an area where people can stay and they don't need to have a car. It is walking distance to the university, walking distance to the city, walking distance to local shops. I haven't spoken to or know the owner, but you know, we can imagine this is someone who is applying for this because they're fulfilling what ultimately is a demand and a need for temporary visitor accommodation. This is not the type of residence that is easily going to be able to accommodate a growing family, or is easily going to be taking a whole house, normal house with 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms and room for kids and cats and dogs off the market. So look, in my mind, as we apply to planning scheme at the moment, it allows for short-term visitor accommodation. I think this is exactly the sort of property that rule entails, and I think the reports that we have from the officers are very sensible. They've done the analysis, they've done the assessment, and I find myself concurring with them, and I'd urge members to support this item. Thanks.
Alderman Briscoe.
Thank you, Chair. Just to confirm, through the appropriate director, was there any representations against this proposal?
Mr. Noy, sorry.
Mayor, no, there wasn't any representations.
So in normal course of events, this wouldn't even get here for a decision?
In the circumstances where the matter is not called in, that's correct.
Yeah, so an elected member called it in?
That's correct.
So, but in normal circumstances, it would not have, it would have just been given the approval of the officers?
I think that was answered,
Thank you. I'm in my debate now. Thank you, Chair. The question I did ask at planning meeting was what was the status of the other 2, because this is a very small conjoined, I think there's 3 units, colonial units. What's the status of the other 2? Were they got permits for short stay?
Yeah, not that I'm aware of, Lord Mayor.
Okay, so this is a conjoined unit to 2 others at least, colonial. The neighbours did not put a representation in. It appears to me that they were quite happy for it to be visitor accommodation, and we are often guided, as Councillor Dutta earlier said, that we've always got the right to go against the officer's recommendation, but in this case we've got no evidence to go against the officer's recommendation. We have no evidence from representations to the committee, no representations from the neighbours. It was only called in, so normally it would be treated by the officers over there and it would get approval. To me, it's one of those situations where it's totally and utterly different to the previous one, where we had heaps of neighbours objecting from experience of the party house. Many of us have visited that the neighbours, and can see how the concerns of a mini hotel next door with a heated swimming pool and various party aspects of that. But this one is a 77 square metre bed sit, basically, that there's been no objections from anyone. And that sense to me is the community is not concerned about this application. The officers confirmed that with their recommendation for approval. So this one is in a totally different situation as the previous one, which we unanimously agreed that it wasn't appropriate to be in a residential area. But this one, all the evidence indicates, all the evidence that's in front of us, our qualified advice is that this should get approval. Now, we may have in the back of our mind thinking there is an issue about Airbnb. All I can say is that's going through, maybe later on the amendment will be approved to go to the Commission, and that's where it will be dealt with. But to actually, according to law, the owners of this property have a right, and the planning officers have assessed that they've got a right and recommend for approval. No representations against. We are, irrespective of our ideological maybe position or our philosophical position that we should refuse it, I think by law it will get approved. If it doesn't get approved here, it will get approved at the planning tribunal at great expense to the council.
Further discussion? Councillor Dutton.
Thank you, Chair. Just two questions. Question number one, is it the rights of the elected member to call it in?
Mr. Noy.
Lord Mayor, it is. There is provision under delegation to call any application in.
Any further discussion?
Thank you. And the second question is, with regards to the comment made that there is no evidence, is clause E661 with regards to parking seen as a criteria or rules that needs to be satisfied, or we do have to have additional evidence?
Lord Mayor, there is that provision that does apply in this instance. It's certainly the officer's view that that discretion already exists with the existing use and will not be further compromised with the change of use as proposed.
Any further discussion? I think it was Councillor Fox up first.
I'd just like to thank the elected member who called this in. I think it's really important that we do address these applications individually. And I'd like to point out that it is not just families who are struggling to find housing in the current climate. There are plenty of singles and couples who I'm sure would really love to find somewhere that's so centrally located, close to uni, close to the city, walkable. They don't necessarily need to have a car. So let's hope that the owners have this bed sit popped on the private rental market long term. Thank you.
Further discussion? Councillor Alderman Barakis.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Lord Mayor, I know, like we just discussed the previous short stay, and there was pretty clear reasons why that application was not appropriate. On this one, I know there's a right for elected members to call forward applications. I know there's a right for elected members to use their discretion in assessing the performance criteria. And the performance criteria that Councillor Dutta referenced is a relevant one here. But there does need to be some sort of basis in fact that something is in need of being refused under those criteria. It seems to me with many of these applications, and usually it's on the, as I said earlier, the likelihood of increased noise, is that we have a application that certain members around this chamber don't like because of a reason that's not included as a criteria in the planning scheme. So we're searching for reasons that's why we might have the ability to refuse something.
Point of order, Lord Mayor.
Yes.
Yeah, point of order. I think it's erroneous of Alderman Barakis to say that we don't have reasons, because those things are part of the performance criteria. So it's actually not a statement of fact that, and I'd ask that Alderman Barakis withdraw that comment.
Well, Lord Mayor, that's not what I
don't think
what I
that's
said.
a point of order, I'm afraid, Deputy.
Right, but it's not factual.
No, that's not. It's if a councillor's been misrepresented during the debate, but there's no problem with someone not providing something that's not factual, unfortunately.
Okay.
Well, Lord Mayor, I think I may have been misrepresented, but I won't call a point of order. The point I made was that we have criteria, and they are relevant criteria, but we have nothing before us to indicate that these criteria haven't been met. We've only got the officer's recommendations and reports that say that they have been met. In the previous item, we had very clear reasons and very clear evidence and reports from deputations as to what the issues were. We've had no representations on this. We've had no suggestions to otherwise as to what the issues are here. It seems that there are, and I didn't say that there were no reasons. I said that elected members appeared to be searching for reasons, because I can't refuse it for the reasons that they would like to, which is that they just don't like short stay. And I know that we're going to be talking about a similar item very soon that might change that. But as of the rules of the day, as they are today, this application before us is compliant with the planning scheme. We are a planning authority and we should exercise that responsibility properly. So I'll be supporting the foreshadowed motion.
Further discussion? Councillor Harvey.
Lord Mayor, there was just a couple of errors mentioned earlier. Firstly, it's 4 conjoined cottages. It's a terrace of 4 houses, and these houses are very narrow. So you'd be lucky to be able to park 2 cars out the front of the 4 houses because they're quite small. There is a driveway, but there's not parking for all 4 terrace houses. There's also parking only on one side of the street in this section of Grosvenor Street. And most of that street, I know because I'm very familiar with that street, having lived in the area for a number of years previously, is mostly rental accommodation. And parking is at a premium all the time there because there's a lot of student parking that comes down from the uni to park in this section of all of Grosvenor Street, but also this particular section of Grosvenor Street. So there is 2-hour parking in some of it, but there's always a demand for parking in this street, and to increase that demand, if it could be avoided, is a good thing. It's often a bottleneck in this street as well, so if 2 cars turn into it, one off Queen Street and one off King Street, it's a real challenge for cars to yield in that street. So there is a lot of local knowledge that you kind of need to understand with regard to that street. So I will be supporting the motion for refusal tonight because I think there are parking issues in this particular area. And when it comes to the comment that there were no representations, I'm not surprised because most of the houses around it are rental properties. And there is a couple of one other Airbnb that I'm aware of further down the street. But I don't think not having any deputations or representations is a fact here because most of those properties, I know through having observed those properties over a number of years in the past, have been rental properties for quite a significant period of time. And to take one extra off the market, I'm not keen for, but based on parking, I think there is a serious issue with parking in this street.
Lord Mayor, I've just got to stand up to correct an incorrect statement I made. It's a clarification. I made an incorrect statement. I said the dwelling was 77 square metres. In fact, it's 58 square metres. So I apologise for that error. I just rechecked it.
Any further discussion?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much. Now, some very valid points have been made, and I do appreciate the fact that we have rights as elected members to call this, which is very important. The aspect of having no reason, I always, when I make my decision, I base it on the performance criteria. Now, it is a matter of judgment. Another elected member may make the judgment and decision and interpret it differently, and therefore that person takes a different position, and I quite respect that. And just because I take another position or interpret it differently does not make my decision inferior in any way. The interesting point here, let me draw your attention to 6.7.5, and it states here that the applicant suggests that there is no evidence. It very clearly says, it suggests that the proposed visitor accommodation would not impact upon the adjoining residents and so forth. There is a suggestion. There is no evidence to substantiate that suggestion. Now, if you look through that, there are facts in there that convinces a number of people that, yeah, there is that evidence. But for me, if I am making the application, I will be biased. I will put that particular argument and present that. So that's one point to note for me. Secondly, I based my argument not on the basis of affordability or availability or because there is difficulty with housing, rental market, etc. My decision is based fairly and squarely on criteria E661. And it says very clearly a number of parking spaces. And then it refers to the fact that it must consider very clearly the number of site car parking spaces must be sufficient to meet the reasonable needs of users, having regard to all of the following, not just A, B, or C, but the whole gamut of the elements mentioned in there. Now, when I consider that and interpret that and look at the facts presented to me, there is definitely a difficulty, a problem with parking. And on that basis, under this particular clause, performance criteria E661, I would support the recommendation or the motion that's been put forward. Thank you.
Any further discussion? Did you want to sum up?
Just a couple of points. To say that there is no evidence in relation to what we're considering is, I think, a little stretch away from what we as elected members can consider. We've heard from Councillor Harvey, who has quite considerable local knowledge in relation to this. We know that renters don't always put in representations. We know that neighbours don't always put in representations for various reasons, and that can include because they feel that they cannot get any change. But this, as Councillor Fox has said, this is a roof over somebody's head versus going to short stay accommodation. Is it a philosophical position? Well, no. We are considering this as a planning authority tonight. We don't have to decide as per the officer's recommendation. That has already been said, and this has been called in. But I do remember, I think it might have been at the last council meeting, we had another item that was called in, which we were considering, which wouldn't necessarily have come before us. So, it's not always the case that if somebody calls something in, there is anything to be said about that. So, I ask that Council support this motion for refusal because it just does not stack up.
I'll put that. All those in favour say aye. Against say no.
Aye.
Show of hands. All those in favour.
Councillor Harvey, Councillor Dutta, Councillor Fox, Deputy Lord Mayor and the Lord Mayor.
And against?
Councillor Coates, Alderman Barakis and Alderman Briscoe. And that's carried, Lord Mayor, 5 votes to 3.
Now we are moving on to item 10. Deputy Lord Mayor, did you want to?
Yes, thank you, Lord Mayor. Lord Mayor, I move that these submissions be received and the...
Councillor Harvey.
Thank you. Lord Mayor, so this the submissions were received from during the public exhibition time. So at the council meeting of the 28th of March of this year, council resolved to initiate the planning scheme amendment, PSA 22.1, to the Hobart interim planning scheme to the use table in each of the general residential zone, the inner residential zone and the low density residential zone for inclusion in the planning scheme to restrict visitor accommodation use if the use is wholly within a single dwelling or dwelling, excluding for ancillary dwellings. The certified amendment was placed on public exhibition from the 2nd of April to the 6th of May, inclusive, which was in accordance of Section 38 of the former provisions of the Land Use Planning Approvals Act. So it was needed to go on exhibition, and we certainly got quite a lot of interest in relation to this item. So as you can see on page 315 of the report, there were quite a number of submissions both for and against, so quite a lot of public interest in relation to this. But I point out for some of the concerns that were raised by organisations which have either an interest in housing and homelessness, or have direct service responsibilities to those members of the community who are finding it very difficult to find a roof over their heads. So we had the Salvation Army, TASCOS, Shelter Australia, like the national body of shelter, the Tenants Union, the Youth Network of Tasmania, and many individual residents who raised concerns about what we've talked about this evening already around residential amenity and the requirement to make sure that there is not a leakage of short stay accommodation places off the market. Lord Mayor, this will now, so if this is approved, and it was approved at the committee last Monday, if this is approved tonight, it will be sent to the Tasmanian Planning Commission for consideration, and they have 3 months to make a decision as to whether this limitation is acceptable and should be part of a part of the City of Hobart interim planning scheme. I urge all committee members, council members tonight to support this. I think it's we know the hazards of having short stay accommodations, which were often rentals, going from rental accommodation to short stay accommodation. So I urge council to support this tonight.
Further discussion?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Look, this was discussed at Langford Committee. I don't intend to revisit all of those discussions, but I think it is important to get on the record. First of all, my thanks to the council officers. They have done a very good thing in going out and seeking community input on this. We heard earlier tonight how important it is to, when we receive information and deputations and stuff from the community, from the people that we as elected members represent. And in this case, we have received it. But it definitely isn't overwhelming in favour of this move. As I read it, even on just a pure numbers alone, and I appreciate there are many submissions received from organisations on both sides, but we have 70 we came back against this and 48 in favour. We have many representations here who have provided valid reasons why they think that short-term accommodation should be an option. They talk about supporting the tourism sector, which is critically important to our city. They talk about supporting local businesses. They talk about being able to provide accommodation for people who want to visit our city. We also received a lot of representations talking about the concern they have in the housing market, the supply of houses and the ability for people to have access to affordable homes. And look, these things aren't necessarily mutually exclusive. But I would posit that if we want to make a positive difference in terms of affordable housing and access to housing, we need to actually look at the supply of housing, not try and use a sledgehammer approach to proceed down this path of banning any new short-term accommodation. There are valid reasons why people would put their properties onto the short-term accommodation market, and it does provide a benefit to the community, and we've heard about that in the submissions we received. In my mind, we go down this path and we risk creating a U-Butte set of winners, those who have the existing permits, and we remove the ability for the small individual owner, you know, the mum and dad, the local person, to compete against, you know, the big hotel chains, the federal groups, the big end of town. To my mind, this, I hope it does help in terms of access to housing, but I fear it won't, and it will instead just create a set of winners and a set of losers. That'll be the local residents of Hobart, like we saw tonight, who are putting in applications to be able to provide ultimately what is a service to the community. And we shouldn't be vilifying those who actually want to put up their housing and put up accommodation units. It does support an industry that's vital to this city, which is tourism. And it does have, and we've received it. We received 70 people who wrote a statutory submission back on this process in support of a short-term accommodation market. And I think a lot of those people have genuine fear that if we go down this path, there's a sense of fairness that's taken away. Where some people have a permit, others won't be able to. Where the big end of town will be able to get in, small little mum and dad won't be able to. And look, I don't think there's overwhelming community support for this. I think they did the right thing. They went out for public consultation. We got it back, and I don't see it as overwhelming. And so look, I won't be supporting the officer's recommendation or the recommendation on this, and I'd urge others not to as well. Thanks.
Sorry, Alderman Briscoe.
Thank you, Chair. I will be supporting it, but I have a lot of doubts whether it will achieve what it sets out to achieve, because I think it's got good intentions. However, will it put residential properties back in the rental market? I think the suggestion by a member of public who tried to ask a question earlier, but it was refused because we were considering him a short stay accommodation tonight, which I think it's quite funny having that rule that we can't have questions about items that are on the agenda. But however, there was a letter to the paper, which was a very good letter in the sense that it suggested a carrot approach rather than a stick approach, where it was suggested that we have a different rate for people who are going to provide their properties for rental. And it was pointed out, and I don't think that the gentleman is still here, Mr. Merridew, suggested something like the cost to have rental properties for usually the mum and dad investors who have one property, it appears. We're not talking about the multi-property person, we're talking about the one property you might have as an investment property, that land tax is extraordinarily high, rates are extraordinarily high. By having an incentive rather than a stick, maybe we'll be able to encourage people to go out of the short-term accommodation market and put it in the rental market. Because I can't see why people would go out of the short stay accommodation market. If they've got an existing permit, they will continue, and presumably their rates will go up because there will be a shortage of them. So I would suggest that a better way, a fairer way, would be to have the carrot approach that has been, one way of doing the carrot approach has been suggested. I note going through the submissions just again, one of them, which I thought was interesting, that people who offer their property for long-term rental during the year, and when to students, and when the students go home, they offer their premises for short-term accommodation for tourists during the summer breaks or during their vacations. And I think that's a fantastic use of a resource that would never go into a full-year accommodation. And they're the sorts of people that wrote us individual letters saying, well, what about this situation? And that's why the danger of having a blanket ability to say no to permits is not finessing it. It's not. There's no clear link that presumably the person will probably sell their house rather than have it as short-term accommodation. So I support it because I think taking it out of the political arena and putting it into a more judicial way of considering these amendments, I think is a good way of going, because I imagine we all got our political views around the table, and therefore we are coloured. Certainly my view is coloured too, and I think it should be considered. There is a chance that the amendment won't be approved by the Planning Commission, and I want it to be tested there, not here. So I support the amendment going to the tribunal, but have deep doubts whether the intentions are going to be met. The good intentions, because they are good intentions, but I think having other ways, including density limits as well for places around world best practice, Chair, suggests that that having density limits for short-term accommodation is the way to go, not an outright ban in a tourist city like Hobart.
Councillor Dutton.
Thank you, Chair. Just a few questions. Alderman Briscoe stated that it's going to the tribunal. I just want a clarification. Is it going to the tribunal or the Tasmanian Planning Commission?
Lord Mayor, it's to the Tasmanian Planning Commission.
Yes, if I made that mistake, it is a tribunal, isn't it, of some kind? Yes, but if I said the wrong words, I apologise. Yeah, it's Planning Commission, I'm aware of that.
I was just seeking a clarification, that's all. Just a clarification because I wasn't too sure. The other question that I have is that there are 3 zones, according to the report. Could the director give me some information as to how many zones are there and why these 3 zones?
Mr. Noy?
Yes, Lord Mayor, look, there are 17 different zones that apply across the Hobart Interim Planning Scheme. These 3 zones were chosen primarily because of these encapsulate higher residential density within the city, and importantly where commercial activity is generally precluded. We didn't want to preclude short-stay visitor accommodation within a current commercial precincts because that's where it's appropriately located. Where we have focused is on those higher residential zones, higher density residential zones that exist throughout the city, and where, as I said, indicated that where traditional commercial activities are generally precluded.
Okay, and just two more questions, Chair. The other question I have is with regards to the amendment. Will this infringe the property owner's rights? That's question. And the other question is with regards to, again, I read in the submission that this will limit the trade practices. I just wanted some clarification on that. Thank you.
Sorry, the first question is which property owners' rights?
The current property owners who have the permit, and also the future who don't.
Trade practices. Yeah, Mr. Noy.
Yeah, look, for those that have existing use rights and have exercised those rights, i.e. they're currently operating at Airbnb under an existing permit, their rights will remain regardless of a change in this position. Now, in relation to any restrictions of trade, the fundamental requirement of council is to have a planning scheme, and under the Land Use Planning Approvals Act, section 11(2) subsection C clearly stipulates the requirements of a planning scheme, and is to, and I'll quote, regulate or prohibit the use or development of any land. And I'd like to also point out that there is already existing prohibitions in a residential zone or residential location within the City of Hobart, and that's Battery Point. And that prohibition has been in place for some time. In fact, the prohibition also existed in other residential zones in the 2000s, and only became discretionary or permitted much more lately, and particularly under the directive, Planning Directive number 6.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you so much for those answers, and thank you so much for the report. I do realise that the arguments presented for and against are quite convincing from both sides. I do acknowledge that. And then one has to weigh with the arguments and the evidence presented. I look at it in the context of, one, that the original purpose for the model for the Airbnb was to share house and not to rent the whole house. And here the recommendation is not for renting the whole house, as it were. But if you have a room that you want to share, that's quite in order. So I quite support that, and I think there is merit in that. The other point that I also considered is to ask myself, what are the reasons for this amendment? Now, there has been some suggestion that there is political motivation, that is a ideological position. Now, we take that on board, that there may be, we don't know, there may be some people who are driving this with their motivation. I don't have the evidence, but people are entitled to push whatever they want to. But for me, leaving aside those assumptions that it could be this motivation, I would have to look at the research and the evidence. And the evidence and the research presented to me by the qualified staff and their arguments and recommendations are based on evidence and arguments. And for me, that is very, very convincing. And the other point that I want to also mention here is that is this in the realm of the council to make this certified amendment? And I am again convinced that the answer to that question of mine is yes, because the Minister of Land Use and Planning Approvals have mentioned in a letter that we do have the jurisdiction to go through that particular process. And on that basis, and the fact that this is going to go to the Tasmanian Planning Commission, is going to be tested and tried, and if they say no, that is what we will accept as the final decision. So I would support this as a process going forward. Thank you.
Further discussion, Councillor Harvey.
Lord Mayor, it was interesting reading the representations and the variety, and I've put them into some sort of categories here. There was a number on both sides that didn't have no address, that had no address. I don't know where they were writing from. There was a number of addresses from outside the local government area, outside of Hobart. There was a number of people who were confused about whole home versus shared homes. So they talked about how much they enjoyed their home sharing experiences, but they were concerned they were going to lose that. So they've misinterpreted what we're aiming for here. Then there was people concerned about the loss of their short stay accommodation outside of Hobart with regard to their holiday homes. So there was an interesting array. So while there might have been 70 submissions against what we're proposing here, many of them misunderstood what was being asked. They're concerned about their share house accommodation. They're concerned about their shacks and their holiday homes as well, which are outside of Hobart. So maybe they're preempting a statewide approach to this at some point. But what we're talking about is Hobart for now, because we're the most impacted local government area, I understand. So we're focused on Hobart. So a lot of those 70 representations miss the point of what we're trying to achieve here. And also, there were some that talked about losing their rights to have a short stay accommodation, and that's not the case. There's no loss of existing right to have a whole home short stay accommodation. I'll just confirm that with the Director.
Mr. Noy, I think you might have answered that before.
Yes, yeah, no, that's one more time. Yeah, one more time. Yeah, that's correct. Provided they're using it for a short stay visitor accommodation and that doesn't cease for an extended period of more than 2 years, then they can continue to that.
Okay. So even though there was 70 representations against and 48 for, a number of the ones against weren't quite clear of what the objective of this this submission to the Tas Planning Commission is all about. So I don't know whether that's our problem for that causing that confusion, or whether Airbnb, who sent out, as I understand, emails to their hosts to put in a submission, may have caused some confusion as well. But I don't know, I haven't seen the email from Airbnb. But when we look at the other side, those in favour of what we're trying to achieve here, there's quite a significant list. The Salvation Army, Hobart City Mission, Youth Network of Tasmania, Shelter National, COTA, and so on. These organisations are at the forefront. They're at they're in the situation of having to deal with people who are homeless. So I think their submissions carry a lot of weight, and I respectfully disagree with Councillor Coates here in his argument earlier. But it's important that we pay attention to the service providers who have the experience and understand what's going on with regard to the crisis in accommodation in Hobart, and we listen to what they've got to say and we respect their views, because they're the ones who are looking after people with housing problems, and they're at the forefront of this. So I hold them in high regard for the work that they do, trying to resolve these issues, and I think that they do carry a lot of weight in their submissions.
Alderman Brackus.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Look, I hope, just on the topic of the these housing groups, I hope that if we're listening to them on this issue, we'll be listening to them on other issues as well. I heard from comments made today when they, after the housing reference group that was held today, that there was comments about the need for planning reform and the fact that the planning process is holding up housing development and restricting supply. So I thought that was an interesting comment to come from these groups. Lord Mayor, look, my university background's in economics and statistics, and there's been a lot of talk about the data sets that we've been gathering to assess this issue. And the reason that we've been told that we're not using the data which I mentioned it in committee, Lord Mayor, but it's worth repeating again tonight. In 2019, this council joined calls for the state government to require the short stay providers to collect data, to provide data to the government for the purposes of setting policy. That was done, that's occurred, and so far the council and numerous, activists have used different data to the same data they were calling for, to set their arguments, instead getting data scraped from third-party groups such as Inside Airbnb, which I'll note the main proponent of these changes, Peter Phibbs, is an advisory board member of. The reason that we've been told that the official state government data that we called for is not being used in these assessments is because they're the beginning of the intro to the document that outlines these statistics. There's a statement about the limitations of the statistics. Lord Mayor, if you go through statistical documents or data sets, whether you're talking about stocks, whether you're talking about weather patterns or other things, there's always a statement setting out the limitations of that data. That's just being upfront and honest about the limitations. Any peer-reviewed paper research will outline the limitations of that research. So to use that as a reason to not use data that we called for, the official data that the government's requiring the short stay providers to provide, I think is a bit concerning. But just to look at that data, one of the interesting comments that we heard was in the report was that between 2016 and 2018, short stay accommodation growth contributed to a loss of about 393 residential dwellings in the Hobart LGA. according to the most recent updates, there are 436, I think, off the top of my head. And the implication there, Lord Mayor, being that, 436. The implication being there that since 2018, in 4 years up till now, we've had 43 new listings. So we aren't seeing a flood of short stay. And Councillor Harvey, I think, made the point. Not a single current owner of a short stay permit is going to lose that permit. So this proposed amendment, with all the good intentions as per what Alderman Briscoe said, isn't going to result in one house coming onto the housing market for long-term accommodation. If anything, it's going to increase the values and just ensure that the properties that have a short stay permit attached to them are always going to have that short stay permit attached to them, because nobody in their right mind would get rid of something quite so valuable. And it is interesting when we're talking about the representations, and in public discourse on this matter, Lord Mayor, there's always the comment that people should be disregarded, or people's opinions on this issue should be minimised if they own short stay accommodations. So, well, the reality is, if you own a permit right now, you should be wanting this to go through. You'll be laughing to the bank because the value of your property is going to skyrocket. You're part of a protected class of, you own a protected class of housing that has a permit that nobody else is ever going to be able to get in those zones. But just
30 seconds.
Can I get an extra minute, Lord Mayor?
By Alderman Briscoe, seconded by Councillor Dutta. All those in favour say aye. Against say no. Carried unanimously.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. On the issue of the representations, we had a number of representations for, a number of representations against, and as was noted, we had more representations against. And what we've seen both publicly, both in the report and in the chamber today, is talking up of those representations that certain elected members agreed with, being those ones for, and attempt to minimise or disregard the views of those that have a negative view. There was many concerns that were raised in the many concerns that were raised that were disregarded completely. But look, Lord Mayor, given the chamber as
Sorry, point of order. I've been misrepresented here. I didn't disregard.
I think you
Councillor
were
Harvey.
named.
Was named? Yeah, you were skirting around it though.
Look, and I hope that doesn't contribute to my time, Lord Mayor.
Next 3 seconds.
Lord Mayor, look, with all that said, and given the chamber as it is tonight, I have every confidence this will pass. I just hope that now that this is going to go through, we'll get sent to the Planning Commission, we can take the issue as academic, and we can hopefully move to issues that are actually going to... Thank you, Lord Mayor. I hope that now we can take this as academic and we can move on to looking at issues, as has been raised today, that we have some levers to pull that will actually impact on housing affordability, because this won't. Let's let this go through tonight, and we'll see that result. But hopefully we can now focus on the actual issues that we can affect.
No further discussion? Thank you. I'll make a few comments. So thanks for the debate around the table. I think the process to make these changes is a good example of local government taking leadership to tackle policy and planning issues that are impacting our community. And it's also an example of how decision makers can use evidence-based, independent policy advice in a responsible way and on behalf of the public interest. And this is important to do rather than always just falling back on ideological positions. The change that we're proposing to send up to the Planning Commission began quite some time ago. It was a joint motion put forward by myself and Councillor Fox in 2020, and the motion asked staff to provide advice about whether there was a need to seek amendments to the state planning laws on short stays and what process we would take if supported. The staff then came back with an in-depth report in 2021, which did make the case that the low level of regulation by the state government in this sector is having an impact on the city's rental housing market. It also outlined a whole range of other responses that other tourist destination cities right around the world and around the country have taken with similar challenges. We aren't alone in terms of cities having to deal with this trend, but unfortunately we have been left to deal with this alone here in Hobart. So without taking action, we were stuck implementing lax and poorly considered rules set by the state government. I think it is important to, as other people have already said, but to recognise that this is a very balanced approach. It is a sensible compromise because it does still allow for growth in visitor accommodation permits, but it will be in those mixed use and commercial zones in particular, like the 64 blocks of our CBD. The regulations don't touch all of those very positive sides of the sharing platforms that we acknowledge: hosted bed and breakfasts, home sharing, renting out your place while you're on holiday, renting an ancillary dwelling or granny flat. All of those will be completely unaffected by these proposed changes. And as has already been raised, it won't also affect the people who have permits. It's not retrospective, which is a fair thing to do. So I do hope that the Planning Commission does find favourably for these changes. As Councillor Dutta, I think, pointed out, it was the recommended path of action by both the Premier and the Planning Minister when they weren't willing to take steps themselves, and we are following this advice. And since the staff work, we have also seen a high volume of very good quality evidence that's been presented to us over several years. And I'd like to thank those agencies and researchers that have gone to the work and the effort to provide this research to us. Some of those names of the organisations have been talked about tonight. And it does behove us as responsible policymakers to listen to the message of these independent policy agencies and charities that are very close observers of the housing market. The research has drawn on some really interesting and important data sets, and there isn't just one data set. And I do have concerns with the state government's official data set because it is a self-declared data set. People who are hosts of properties decide which category they fall into. There is no compliance, there's no resources in compliance. So the official data set has its own challenges, but there are a whole range of data sets that these researchers have now come to us. They've looked at the official data sets and found that there's probably around 480 permits that have been issued by the City of Hobart to convert a whole suburban home into a visitor tourist business in recent years. There's also another source that's recently been released, which is we can see that the supply of long-term rentals has been declining, and that's been that was through an analysis of rental bonds in our city. Thank you. And then the other thing was the other research was the ground truthing of matching the listed properties with some real estate history, and found that 47% of visitor accommodation properties also had a rental history. So this is a pragmatic and evidence-based policy response that we're taking. It will make a difference to Hobart's housing crisis, and I thank all the elected members who are willing to take this evidence and this crisis seriously. Thank you. Would you like to sum up, Deputy?
No, I think you've summed up very well. Part to say thank Mr Noy and his staff, particularly Ms Hogue.
All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against say no. Show of hands, all those in favour.
Councillor Harvey, Councillor Dutta, Councillor Fox, Alderman Briscoe, the Deputy Lord Mayor and the Lord Mayor.
And against?
Councillor Coates and Alderman Barakis. That's carried, Lord Mayor, 6 votes to 2.
So now we're moving on to item 11, which is the response to a notice of motion. Deputy Lord Mayor.
Yes, Lord Mayor, I'd like to move that this be. I'd like to move this motion.
Second by Councillor Fox.
Lord Mayor, this was from a notice of motion from Councillor Fox, looking at how best, or asking council officers how best we can address the issue of access into heritage buildings. We know that we have quite a challenge there with very strict heritage provisions for obvious reasons to protect the streetscape, to make sure that those with the economic values, and obviously Alderman Barakis would consider, given his economics background, that economic benefits of heritage buildings are significant to our city. But this is really looking at how we can just make sure that access for everybody, so access is possible in heritage areas and heritage buildings in particular. The recommendation, unlike a planning scheme amendment, the suggestion is that that Council propose as part of the review of the state planning provisions currently being undertaken by the State Planning Office that there is some flexibility introduced into the requirements of the development standards in the local historic heritage code, which would allow for equal access to buildings. We know, and there was a Melville Street property which was looking to have a lift placed at the front of the building, and there are heritage concerns there. And there are various other examples which quite often are abandoned by applicants who want to make their buildings accessible but can't necessarily do that. So it's a real issue for development and sensitive development in our city, and I believe this recommendation is a sensible way forward to see if it can be part of the local provision schedule. So I thank Councillor Fox for bringing this to Council.
Okay, any further discussion? Alderman Barakis.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'm glad to support this one. I think it's a great suggestion by Councillor Fox, and I think it'd be an improvement. I think it was Councillor Coates a while ago that made the comment that the best way to protect heritage in our state is to make sure that it's usable and continues to be used. And like the Deputy Lord Mayor, I think that there's great economic value in our heritage. I would add to Councillor Coates' comments that not just to these heritage buildings and infrastructure need to be continually used to be maintained. I think they need to be able to be enjoyed and accessed by everybody. And if we have situations where accessibility can't be improved to certain buildings because of heritage restrictions, I think if we can change that, I think that's only a good thing, so that everybody's able to enjoy these and these buildings are able to be used, maintained, enjoyed by everybody. So I think this is this will be a positive change, and I'd be encouraging everybody to support it.
Okay, if there's no further discussion, I'll put that. All those in favour say aye. Against say no. Carried unanimously. Item 12 is the City Infrastructure Committee. Councillor Harvey.
Thanks, Lord Mayor. There's only one item tonight from City Infrastructure.
Seconded by Alderman Barakis.
Haven't moved it yet. I'll move the item 12, response to petitions. Lord Mayor, this was the result of a petition from Gemma Kitsos, who's a resident in South Hobart, and they obtained 232 signatures to the council looking at lowering the speed limit at the pedestrian crossing on McRoby's Road, where the bike track passes over to the driveway on the other side. And the city officers said, yes, we're happy to recommend changing the speed from 50 kilometres down to 40 kilometres to make that area a safer place to cross the road. So I'll just go through the notice of the recommendation. An application be made to the Transport Commission requesting a change of speed on McRoby's Road between Cascade Road and Syme Street, and between Syme Street between Cascade Road and De Grave Street and Nevin Street in the South Hobart area, from the current default speed limit of 50 down to 40. So there's already 40 Ks in some areas around there, but this makes it uniform. And then the second part of this was to look at unifying the speed limit with the 40 K zone further up, closer to the city along Cascade Road. So that was an addition that came up at the meeting. So part 2 was further consultation and investigations be undertaken in respect to joining the proposed 40k zone as outlined in clause 1 with the previous council endorsed proposal for the 40k zone in the South Hobart shopping precinct between XL Lane and the Southern Outlet. And part 3, officers investigate and upgrade the road signage on McRoby's Road as you approach that rivulet crossing as well, and the petitioners be advised of such. So I think the petitioners are quite happy with the outcome. They realise that making a deputation and a petition to the council can get results. So they're very pleased with the outcome of changing the speed in that zone around there from 50 to 40, but including a number of other streets as well, and then looking at the connecting of the speed limit or uniform speed limit across that whole region, which yourself and I think Councillor Burnett was also keen to see. And I think we all were. I think it was unanimous that we should look at a uniform speed along there. But it was interesting also on the night we had a presentation from the Road Safety Board, or whatever their correct name is, talking about what the best speed limit is, the safest speed limit, and best practice now is 30k, which really limits the amount of injury that occurs if there's a collision between a pedestrian and a car. So in effect, 30k is the best practice speed limit, but I think at this point in the story, it'd be challenging to aim for 30k's, but I think it's something that Hobart needs to consider overall, is how do we start to evaluate speed limits across the city and look at how we can slow cars down, because slower cars are safer for pedestrians, bikes, scooters, that sort of thing. So that's something we should explore in the future, about reducing speed limits in the appropriate locations in Hobart from 50 to 40 and from 40 to 30. But today I'm really pleased with this outcome, and I think we should have unanimous support here tonight, I hope. So thanks, Lord Mayor.
Discussion? Councillor Coates.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Look, it's an interesting one. I guess I'm sort of reminded that nothing we do happens sort of in a vacuum. We're within a broader sort of ecosystem here, and we all know that over is over. The Tasmania Police have now made a change and running a campaign, as I'm sure we're all aware. There is no sort of leniency, or very limited leniency anymore. And, you know, the old days of, oh, well, it's, you know, 5k's over, it's within 10% or whatever, and you won't get anything is gone. And the messaging is very strong now, and we all know and we all abide, hopefully, by the speed limits. And look, with that in mind, I'd sort of, in my mind, if rather than going down a path of just constantly slowing down and lowering every speed, I think if we're going to operate in a world where we've got the enforcers of a speed limit on one side saying they're going to have zero tolerance, and they're going to run a very strict messaging campaign saying keep below that at all times. On the other side, I think we do need to then have an understanding that, well, when it comes to speed limits, because my fear is that by dropping it to 40, all we're going to do is we're going to see a whole host of people inadvertently getting pinged. If the issue is around safety and concerns of safety, I wonder if the best avenue isn't to put in speed humps, to put in you know, correct markings and crossings. If it's people crossing the road that are concerned at a certain intersection, I suspect the best way to deal with that is to look at the markings at that intersection. And it might be putting in a divider in the middle road so people only have to cross one section of road at once. It might be putting in a speed hump at certain positions where we know that at that point in the road, you know, visibility is poor and we need to encourage people to slow down, so you put in a speed hump. You know, we do have this sort of creeping lowering of speed limits across our city, and to my mind it does add to the congestion issue. It does inadvertently slow people down at times of a day where the roads are hardly used, and yet we see people sort of having to trundle along at a very slow speed. You know, we don't make policy in a vacuum. There has been a change. It's very well publicised at the moment by Tas Police, and we all should hopefully support that, because it's doing the right thing, which is saying, well, we set these speed limits, and if you go outside that, over is over. zero tolerance. We now have unmarked speed camera vans going around. The compliance is being ramped up in this area, but I think that we sort of need to acknowledge that, and I'm not so sure that just lowering speeds, and I appreciate that the residents who've put this petition forward have a concern in the area, but I'm not so certain that the best response to that is a lowering of a speed limit. I think that when you've got the car going along at 5 a.m. and then being forced to trundle along at 40 or 30 or whatever the speed is it goes to, in this case it's 40, you do sometimes have unintended consequences. And I think when you blanket lower speeds, when we reduce the capacity of people getting around our city in a timely manner, and ultimately I think what it'll end up is a whole lot of people travelling at 45 who get pinged. And look, I just struggle with some of these, and I think that we sort of do need to acknowledge that there's other levers that are being pulled at the moment, and they're running a very good campaign around speeding and people being over. And so look, I don't find myself supporting this, albeit I can appreciate the concern raised by the residents. Thank you.
Alderman Briscoe.
Look, I do support it. Just reading the report again there, it says it's not going to have a great change in the speed of the vehicles there, because the 85th percentile vehicle speed is already 39 kilometres per hour. So I don't know what the volume of traffic there is. Perhaps have some indication through you, Chair, to we don't look like we've got Ms. Cooper.
What's the question?
The question is, if there's someone to answer it, through you, Chair, what's the volume of traffic? This is presumably the traffic from the tip along that road.
Through you, Lord Mayor, I would need to take that question on notice. My apologies, but I don't know that.
Thank you. So if we did have that, we could work out how many cars are involved that aren't in that 85th percentile. But it seems to me that it won't have great change in the speed. Now, if it was on Cascade Road or Liverpool Street or some arterial road that's part of our network, we would really struggle to find a good reason to slow the traffic down to 40. So I disagree with, as probably one would expect, Councillor Harvey, who believes that we should all be walking. Even if we come from Kingston, Clarence, Glenorchy. You can get away. He can get away with all sorts of funny things, but you don't pull him up.
Seriously, point of order. Point of order.
You said time me up.
No, I know. Yeah.
Could you withdraw
I apologise for saying that. But point of order is, at no point have I ever suggested people should be walking from Kingston. That's just a really silly comment.
Okay. Well, I apologise but I think that it's well known. I apologise if I indicated that Councillor Harvey believed people should walk from Kingston, Glenorchy, Clarence, and not have cars. I apologise for that, but he did mention, it's quite on record, that he wants to reduce the number of cars in the city and reduce the speed of going through the city. And I don't think I've misrepresented him there. Could I just check that? Have I misrepresented you there?
If I could answer, Lord Mayor, I do. I believe that we could get a lot of cars off the road if people used other alternatives for short distances, like riding their bike, walking, catching a scooter. But we're not talking about long distance walking, we're talking about all those short trips that clog up our streets.
Thank you for that, Councillor Harvey. So my impression of your opinion is correct. I am supporting this motion. As I've said, I am supporting it, and I think it's a good thing. This area has got people going into the female factory as well as children crossing the road there to go to school. So I am supporting it. I'm very aware of this area because I use the Alinea Park very regularly, and I was using it on Sunday with a good friend of mine and her family. So all I can say is we've got to be really careful when we get out of these minor streets and start reducing the traffic. And I think, without misrepresenting him again, he did, the Councillor Harvey, the Chairman of the Infrastructure Committee, suggested that we lower speeds right through our city. And I don't think that's a good idea for traffic management. So So I'll leave it at that. I've just had a different view to Councillor Harvey, which we were entitled to.
Deputy Lord Mayor.
Yeah, I have a question to Ms Cooper, through you, Lord Mayor. Do we know, have we got any feedback from any of the 40k zones that we've made? I'm thinking of Murray Street. Have we any statistics as to whether there have been many traffic offences in relation to speed?
Through you, Lord Mayor, again, I would need to take that on notice to understand the performance of those previously changed zones.
Thank you. And I might just make the point that if this is supported tonight and there can be 40k zones, you know, the request is accepted, that will become law, and everybody has a responsibility to follow those new speed limits. I just also make the point that, and I think it was the point, the essence of Gemma Kitsos and her community's petition was that we have large trucks. We have large trucks and their council trucks, trucks going to the tip, trucks from Mail Sand, trucks from Cascade and various other organisations or businesses moving in this vicinity, and we have small children. So it's really important at the first point, when we have different user groups using these areas, we have to be cognisant of the most vulnerable. So the most vulnerable need to be considered, and I think, you know, again, as Councillor Harvey has said, the beauty of this petition is that it has received a response, and I think some improvements from the original motion, courtesy of you, Lord Mayor, in relation to how this motion is before us. So I think this is a really good outcome from a group of concerned parents who have brought this to council.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I thought this was going to sail through without debate, this one. I'm surprised at how controversial it's become. Lord Mayor, I'll be supporting this one. And I think I agree both with Councillor Harvey and Councillor Coates, just in different ways. Look, I don't support reducing speed limits in every instance, and Councillor Harvey and I have disagreed on this issue in the past, but I think it's a case-by-case basis that we need to assess these things on, and in this particular case, I think it absolutely makes sense. We heard from deputations, we saw what was in front of us during committee. We don't have like we're talking about the inner city, you have arterial roads, the changes to speed limits have impacts on traffic and the ability to process cars and allow people to get through the city. This isn't a arterial road. It's a residential area. Yes, it does lead to the tip, but we talk about trucks, and I think Councillor Coates made the point about what speed humps and other things, and we did hear that given the topography of the road and the vehicles that would be using that, it could actually be more dangerous to have those there, unsettling traffic. I think this does make sense. I think it will make the area safer. And once again, I think if we're getting onto the broader issue of speed limit changes, it's one that we do need to look at on a case-by-case basis and weigh up the pros and cons. And yes, there are significant safety concerns that we need to take into consideration, but there are other concerns. But on all the balance of the issues, I think it is the logical and right thing to do here. So I'll support this one, Chair.
Okay, would you like to sum up?
Yeah.
Never thought to ask. Just to pick up on Councillor Coates' comment that safety is the number one thing, but you don't support lower speeds in an area where there's quite a significant number of kids crossing that road to go to school on their bikes. So, okay, there you go. There's your first contradiction.
When it comes to speed humps, again, Councillor Coates, you mentioned that there's other treatments that might be more appropriate for this area. Having garbage trucks and all those trailers and things that go to the tip going over speed humps is an option. However, the best option is to reduce the speed limit. That's what we were told by the officers.
Point of clarification, Lord Mayor. Look,
Sorry, no.
no?
Point of order, is it?
I was going to make a point.
I don't need any clarification.
Point of order, Lord Mayor. A misrepresentation. When I speak about other treatments, it's when I speak about other treatments, it's not necessarily just speed humps. For example, a sign saying there's a crossing or a rivulet or coming up.
Yeah. That was a misrepresentation, but maybe you would have expanded on it slightly differently.
But if we look at the...
Just continue.
Okay, thanks.
Councillor Harvey.
If we look at this road and who uses this road, first you've got the tip. And the tip is for our garbage trucks and for contractors to bring their waste. So you've got big trucks travelling along there every day, lots, I can't tell you the exact number, but it's a lot of movement of heavy vehicles taking stuff to landfill. And I'd say that if we look at the amount of waste that goes to landfill, it's slightly below 20,000 tonnes. So we have 20,000 tonnes of waste moving along that road per year in large vehicles, small vehicles, and I would say hundreds of trailers that also go along that road, towing trailers. So speed humps and trailers are a bit tricky, but there's a lot of traffic that doesn't use that road. It also takes us into the female factory, as was mentioned. So this is a good outcome for that area. The council officers were very supportive. The petitioners have got what they requested, so they're very happy as well. And we've got to keep in mind that, as Alderman Coates said, safety is number one. And if we want to have safe streets, then we need to have the appropriate speeds that encourage people to walk more, ride their bikes and the scooter. So lower speed limits do give a sense of safety and does give more time for cars to stop so they don't contact anyone. So 40k is better than 50 when it comes to safe streets. 30k is the recommended speed if you want to eliminate all interactions between people and cars that could lead to death and injury. So what I suggest is not blanket lowering of speeds all over Hobart, but as we evolve, we will look at more opportunities, I'm sure, in the future to create 40k speed limits in the right locations, and as well as 30. And we've already got 40k's coming as well in our shopping strips. So.
Harvey, I'll put that. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against say no.
Aye.
Carried unanimous. Oh, sorry. All show of hands. All those in favour say aye. Show your hands, please.
Councillor Harvey, Councillor Dutta, Councillor Fox, Alderman Barakis, Alderman Briscoe, Deputy Lord Mayor and the Lord Mayor.
And against?
Councillor Coates. It's carried, Lord Mayor, 7 votes to 1.
Okay, we're moving on now to item 13, which is the Salamanca. Now, Salamanca bylaw, but I think Councillor Sherlock is away. So is someone able to present her item that was present?
I move the motion as it is on the books, and simply say that for the purpose of some summary backgrounds, that the current Salamanca bylaw number 1 of 2010 expired on 26 May 2020, and the new Salamanca market bylaw number 1 of 2022 was considered by the council on 11th of April 2022. Now, at that meeting, the council provided delegation to advertise the public consultation process. And during the consultation process or period, only one submission was received. And it is my understanding that the city's legal officer reviewed the submission and has advised that the content raised in the submission are operational matters and has no relevance to the bylaw. And therefore, I would submit the motion as it is, as presented to us by the staff. Thank you.
Any further discussion? I'll put that. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against say no. Carried unanimously. Item 14, Speaker's Corner trial.
Again, Chair, I would move the motion as it is on the books.
Seconded by Councillor Fox.
Just for some background, the Speaker's Corner was on trial, I understand, for 6 months, which started from 26th of April to 31st of October in 2021. And the aim was to expand the opportunities for speech and creative expression. Prior to the Speaker's Corner, there was only one location for public speaking, and I understand it was at the Elizabeth Street Mall. Now, the new terms and conditions for the Speaker's Corner permit were developed and drafted in consultation with the internal stakeholders. It was reviewed by the Equal Opportunity Tasmania and the lawyers Simmons Wolfhagen. Now, the feedback and comments were collected throughout the trial, and most respondents were positive about the opportunity that was given to the speakers. Therefore, on that basis, this recommendation was made to us by the staff, and at the committee meeting, this was supported unanimously, and I recommend that.
Alderman Barakis.
Just some questions, Lord Mayor. Just the first one, because I'm just noting, and I'll just cycle down to where we go. Part 7 of the report in the committee, financial implications. It all says not applicable. Does that imply that there was no, and through you, sorry, Lord Mayor, does that imply there was no cost to the program?
Ms. Cooper.
Thank you, through you, Lord Mayor. There was no cost to the council separate to running it as part of a larger program out in the open, but specifically for the Speaker's Corner, there was no cost.
Right. Okay. Because I know it was one of the concerns that was raised was cost, but for the program itself, there was no cost. Is that right?
That's correct.
That's just been answered. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Just. And just the other point was, it does say that, prior to the 6-month trial, Elizabeth Street Mall had been the only site. So there's 2 sites now, one in Salamanca and one in Elizabeth Street Mall. Is that correct?
Did you get that one?
Where are the locations where these are occurring, just for the benefit of the listening public?
Thank you. Through you, Lord Mayor, my understanding is that the only place in the city will be the Speaker's Corner at Salamanca.
Oh, okay. Thank you for that. Lord Mayor, I'm not going to push the point on this one, but I'm not sure if I support this, only because, just noting 4.2 in the report sort of notes that Elizabeth Street Mall was the only site prior to the trial for public speaking in Hobart, and the policy aimed at expanding the opportunities for public speaking, and we've still got the same number of sites, and it's more heavily regulated than the previous one. And hasn't expanded, in my view, much. I think this is something that should be more open to members of the public that wish to speak publicly. It shouldn't be restricted to one particular freedom of speech location. And that does extend to obviously things that might be said that obviously within the law that some people might find uncomfortable, but that such is the nature of free speech. So look, Lord Mayor, like I said, I'm not going to sort of push the point on this one, but I won't be supporting this one tonight.
Councillor Harvey.
Just for Alderman Barakis' benefit, I'll just give a brief history of this. The Speaker's Corner in the mall was dominated by some particular speakers. And I don't know whether you were here, but it went on for a long time, and councillors, aldermen and the council regularly received complaints that they couldn't operate their shops because there was these aggressive speakers operating at Speaker's Corner. So it became clear that that was an inappropriate location for that sort of activity. and there was a whole lot of drama over a number of years to try and resolve it to the benefit of the general public and to the benefit of the traders in the mall. So the alternative was to come up with a better place for Speaker's Corner, which is where we've got it. So this is a good outcome for Speaker's Corner. We still have the ability to speak, but anyone who's loud is not going to annoy the traders in the mall like they did for a number of years. When it comes to the cost, the initial cost of setting this up was associated with planning application and with a little bit of infrastructure, and that got beaten up by a couple of people when it first occurred, how they carried on about how much we'd spent per person speaking, but what they didn't elaborate on was once it's set up, it's there forever and there's no ongoing cost. So it's a good outcome. So the cost of setting it up has been covered, and now it's cost-free as we go forward. And the third part, the location at Salamanca, I think is a good location because it allows for a bigger crowd if you can pull a crowd to your presentation or to your speech. So I think it's a good location where it is. The other one that was mentioned was it's overly regulated. I don't know if you've seen the form, but have a look. It's not that onerous. I had a look at it before the committee meeting to see if I could fill it in, and I didn't have any issues with that form. It was all online, pretty straightforward. So, and that just helps with giving the guidelines for how to use that space and what you can and can't do. So I think it's important that there are some regulations to make sure that the space is being used appropriately.
Alderman Briscoe.
Thank you, Chair. I just can't find it, but I did take a photograph of the signage. The signage will need to change because it actually says it's a trial, and so there will be a cost in changing. There will be cost in a noting there were two speakers that are not mentioned here in the report. There was the Louise Bloomfield and Louise Elliott, very accomplished speakers. And there were a number of council officers present when they were speaking. So there is a cost. You may have a different view of those two ladies, Chair, but I believe they don't need censoring. In the Speaker's Corner, in the Speaker's area, there were, as I said, a number of council staff obviously sent down to monitor what those two particular people said. So there is a cost, the cost of those officers' time. So whilst there's no cost in theory, in practice there is a cost. Whether I've been to Hyde Park in London, you could almost say anything in Hyde Park, listening to the speakers, home of democracy. And free speech, and there's a very famous person that I know said, even if you get offended, you're allowed to, in a free and open society. You have the ability to be offended, and whilst we try to put in those conditions that we shouldn't offend anyone, in a democratic society we can offend people within the law. So I am a bit like, I think Alderman Barakis may not support this. I may not support it as well.
Anti-free speech.
Excuse me. Yeah, I do. You shouldn't be talking over.
Sorry.
Alderman Briscoe, please.
The second infringement. Thank you, Lord Mayor, for actually listening this evening to some of the comments that normally are not pulled up. Thank you for that.
Well, I got a point of order was raised by Councillor Alderman Baraka, so I responded to that.
I didn't get a point of order. Did you have it on you?
All right, no conversation.
Alderman Baraka, Alderman
Well,
Briscoe.
thank you, Councillor Burnett. Oh, I'm sorry, Councillor Reynolds. Right, so I think there is a cost. The conditions are onerous, and there'll be a cost of replacing the sign as well. I think it's a terrible position. But the only thing I agree with what Councillor Harvey said is that we did get a lot of complaints about one particular, or I think it was one particular person, that the Speaker's Corner in the mall did affect the shopkeepers, the few shopkeepers we have left in the mall, there's business. So I think that was a legitimate reason for moving it.
Any further summing up or discussion? Councillor Harvey, did you want to sum up?
I didn't move it.
Oh, sorry. Councillor Dutta, did you want to sum up?
No, Chair, I won't. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
I'll put that. All those in favour say aye. Against say no.
No.
Show of hands. All those in favour.
Councillor Harvey, Councillor Dutta, Councillor Fox, and the Lord Mayor.
Headline.
Councillor Coates, Alderman Barakis, and Alderman Briscoe. And that's carried, Lord Mayor, 4 votes to 3.
So now we have the request for financial delegation, annual grants, item 15. Councillor Dutta, are you happy to move this one?
Yeah, I would, Chair, thank you. I move
Seconded
motion as it is on the books and just make some
by Councillor Fox.
summary comments. Again, it's my understanding that it is in the light of the upcoming local government elections and in the interest of good governance that the Council delegate authority to the CEO to approve the panel's recommendations for the annual grants that can award over $20,000. The request for financial delegation follows precedence that was approved in the lead up to the 2018 Council election. This year, the panel's recommendations will be ready for consideration in September, and given it will be time sensitive, hence this matter be delegated to the CEO. Once grants have been approved by the CEO, elected members will be provided with the detailed information regarding the grants applications prior to the information being made public. And therefore, on that basis, Lord Mayor, I would recommend the motion as it is on the books. Thank you.
Okay, any discussion? With that, all those in favour say aye. Against say no. Carried unanimously. Item 16, the Economic Development and Communications Committee. Would someone like to move that?
I will move that. Thank you. No comment.
So that's Business Events Tasmania, the motion that's on the books, and seconded by Alderman Barakis. Is there any discussion? No. Councillor Harvey.
Lord Mayor, I was very happy with the presentation from the CEO. I did ask about a previous amendment we had to a grant, which was regard to ensuring that members and all their efforts within the organisation, the Business Events Tasmania, had a focus on reducing single-use plastics, and that was really successful. So our waste officer ran a number of workshops with the members of that organisation. So that was a really good outcome, I thought, and that people were really positive about how they could reduce plastic pollution. And with regard to this grant, I also asked what they were doing, how they were working with regard to the with the carbon neutral tourism program that's being rolled out in Tasmania. And it was good to hear that they were part of that, that they knew about it, that they were engaged in this carbon neutral tourism program that's recently been established. So I was very pleased to hear that they're at the edge, they're at the cutting edge of what's going on with regard to global tourism, and that they did inform us that clients coming to Tasmania are very conscious of their carbon footprint, and they're making requests that the hotels that they stay in, that the businesses that provide services to these delegates and things are able to demonstrate that they're heading in that direction towards, you know, some responsible environmental outcomes and to do with climate change and the environment. So there's a movement going on. So I was really pleased to hear that feedback from the CEO.
Okay, I'll put that. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against say no. Carried unanimously. Item 17 is the World Cities Summit. Would you like to move this one, Councillor Fox, or were you part of that?
I'm happy to move it, Lord Mayor.
Alderman Briscoe moved it.
Happy to move it.
And seconded by, who else was the present? Councillor Dutta.
Yeah,
Would you like to speak to that?
Yeah, just very briefly, it seems to have a very good agenda. Whilst I normally wouldn't be sending, I don't think really it is a good policy for the CEO to bring a report like this before us, but I think under her own delegation she'd be able to use her discretion whether it goes or not. But in this case, I think it's a good idea. It's minimal cost. It seems about $6,000 because the CEO has chose to travel economy. About $2,000 for accommodation and about a bit over, or nearly $3,000 for the registration. So I hope she comes back. The CEO comes back with some good ideas, and there'll be one other person presumably with them as well. So it's good that there's no elected members going, because I would say in this time and period, I'll notice the elected members from other jurisdictions. I think Townsville and Melbourne, Lord Mayors are going. I don't think Townsville's got a mayor of Townsville and the Lord Mayor of Melbourne are going, and perhaps others. But in this case, I think in our budget situations, it's good that we're getting the information to our top officer.
Councillor Coates.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Look, very quickly, supportive of this, but in reading the report, I just wanted to commend officers. I know that one of our strategic priorities has been to improve relationships and links. Obviously, this is an opportunity to go and make links elsewhere and promote our city, but in reading the report, it is very pleasing to note that they've engaged with Tourism Tasmania, with Department of State Growth, to actually set up meetings with trade organisations, with investment opportunities over there. And so this is not just City of Hobart going off, it's actually working collaboratively with partners and with other organisations. And look, I just find it very pleasing to read in the report, and I'll be supporting it.
I'll put that. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against say no. Carried unanimously. Item 18, report for the CEO, Deputy Lord Mayor.
Yeah, look, I'll move this. The CEO isn't obviously here, but there was a workshop in relation to this, and it was a motion from Alderman Barakis, which had been discussed also at Finance earlier. The week before, and this essentially is suggesting a caretaker provisions, and also it draws heavily on the Kingborough model, which had been placed, which had been recommended by the Minister for Local Government, Minister Street.
Seconded by Alderman Barakis.
I do have a question. So, just in relation to some of the suggestions of the role or the caretaker role that the administration does, so the council officers do. Just through you to Mr. Doyle or Mr. Noy, just in relation to the council acting as a planning authority, how long is that likely to be that we wouldn't be a planning authority? Is it a month? Because
Lord Mayor, Mr. Jackson might be best to respond.
Through you, Lord Mayor, I think with the proposed changes, we have the last council meeting on the 25th of June, and then the next one on the 14th of November. So it's about... sorry, Lord Mayor, 25th of October.
Right.
And then the next one, so the first normal council meeting post the election would be on the 14th of November. So it's a period of about 2 and a bit weeks.
2 and a bit weeks. Perhaps another question, if I may, through you to Mr. Noy, just in relation to that and having to make decisions. I mean, do you think that might be? I mean, it sounds to me a bit like a Christmas situation. Is where we sometimes have lack of provision for people when they're on holidays to put in representations, or some developers making the most of a situation. Is this likely in this sort of situation, through you to Mr. Noy?
Yes, Lord Mayor, look, it won't stop people from putting in submissions. That won't be, a situation like we normally have at Christmas time, because people won't normally be on leave or on holidays, public holidays during that period. In relation to, sorry, your second question was in...
No, it was really whether that sort of period of time would warrant, other developers using that window to...
Yeah, look, it's still open. It's still certainly open to elected members to call matters in and to have special meetings if it's required under those circumstances.
So is that? But I thought this was a caretaker responsibility. I'm a little confused.
Perhaps to assist Lord Mayor, the motion before you certainly gives the director the delegation. But in exercising that delegation, if there was an elected member that chose to call it in, I mean, we could consider that. I think, Lord Mayor, it is important to note that Mr Noy actually had that delegation last election, even though we didn't have the caretaker provisions. It's not an unusual step to take. And certainly I think, Lord Mayor, it does help avoid particular applications being tangled up in the throes of electioneering.
Okay, thank you.
Any further discussion? Alderman Barrakas.
Lord Mayor, thank you. Look, I'm not going to go and try and sell this because I think the council unanimously agreed that this was a much needed reform, and I think there were some issues that I think popped up during the workshop. And has this been tightened? Has the wording of this been tightened up since then? It's not the same as what we discussed in the workshop, is it?
Lord Mayor, Mr Jackson.
Through you, Lord Mayor, yes, we did make some amendments following the discussion at the workshop.
There were a few concerns that I think were raised by a number of people, including the Lord Mayor and myself, such as the using media or using your position on council for media, and like there was potential concerns that somebody conducting their duty might fall foul of that just by making their way into the media. There's other issues such as using town hall as an authorising location, and I think there'll be a bit to work through. But having spoken to other people in other municipalities in state, I think this is a good test for a set of caretaker provisions that will eventually be enshrined in legislation. That will obviously be firmer, and they will need to be perfect effectively. So this election will be a good test for what's practical, what's not practical, and what captures and is fair. We wouldn't want to see any situations where councillors are being handicapped in a way that unelected candidates aren't, as much as is reasonable. But look, at the end of the day, this will achieve, hopefully, the goal. One is to protect the organisation, as Mr Doyle said, from electioneering of the day, and the other to ensure that it'll be the incoming council that makes major decisions that decide the direction of our city, and not the outgoing council. I think that's entirely proper. That's what other levels of government do. It's not a controversial thing. It's considered a long enduring part of democracy, that this is fit and proper and preserves our democratic process. So I'll be encouraging everybody to support this one.
Thank you. Look, I'm very sorry I didn't get to that workshop because of commitment at work. I did send my apology in, whether it was recorded or not, I don't know. Just interested, I'm going to support I think it's a good thing that we've got to this stage, and at one stage I think the administration was saying it wasn't possible to do it in time, and it's happened, so thanks to the officers for doing that. Just on page 43 of which is part of attachment A, I just don't understand. It says council committees and groups. Elected member shall not use their membership of a council committee or appointment as a member of an external group to disseminate information or promote their or any other candidate's election campaign. For example, this policy would prevent the distribution of promotional period by elected member to members of a group or committee of which that elected member was a member by virtue of them being an elected member. So on the Parks Committee, there could be a great story, and I'm sure you would have used it, say on funding for halls, whatever it is, a Saddle car park. It's on the agenda. I'm going to use it because I support it. Would this policy stop me from using something that's on a council agenda and report that would fit in with something that I've been pushing for already.
Mr. Jackson. Would you like to respond, or Mr. Dodd?
Lord Mayor, perhaps I'll have a go. Mr. Jackson might want to add to it. I think Alderman Briscoe, this is a policy that does its best to provide some direction to us. Now, if either a sitting member or a candidate had a particular interest in a proposal that was before council and on open agendas, then as an individual, this does not take away their right. Certainly the Lord Mayor is still a spokesperson for council, but I guess the intent of the policy is to try and avoid a particular committee member using that membership to benefit their election potential. And I think at the workshop there was an example made where a potential candidate might be a member of an advisory committee and try to utilise that membership to help their candidacy. So the intent is to really try to get everyone, whether they're a member of a particular committee or not, on the even playing field. I think as Alderman Baraka said, Lord Mayor, this is a first attempt. Certainly in my experience, the Kingborough Council and this one are the first time that councils are having a go at a caretaker policy. I think it will become legislated in the future, and it's almost a trial to see how we go. It will require goodwill, because I think anything that's put in here can be challenged and difficult, but the intent, Alderman Briscoe, is to try and avoid or prevent a committee member getting an advantage.
So, for example, if I had re-elect Alderman Jeff Briscoe, Chairman of the Parks Committee, former Chairman of the Planning Committee, former Chairman of the Governance Committee, would that policy stop me from doing that? Because that shows experience. And would the Lord Mayor in her motion material would have to avoid using the word Lord Mayor?
To answer, Lord Mayor, the answer is no.
Good.
That's
okay.
not the intent.
No.
Rather, information that a committee member might obtain through their membership of the committee that they use, rather than their membership or any other qualification.
I appreciate that, because thank you for that, because that's a clarification. It's on record now on our YouTube, so if I need to, I won't need clarification in the words. As you said, it's a document. The next document in 4 years' time probably will have slightly different wording. And the legislation will too, so it'll be a lot clearer. The second question I have, another question I have, it mightn't be the second one, it might be the third one. Say, for example, a candidate wanted to hire the Mawson Place or Mather's Place or the conference room to launch their campaign. Will that be allowed, like during the election campaign?
Mr. Jackson.
Through you, I think I've got this one, Lord Mayor. Through you, Lord Mayor. Of course, as any member of the community, those venues are available for hire and use by the community, so there's no reason why those same venues wouldn't be available to elected members, provided they were utilised and hired on the same terms and conditions.
Right, so if an elected member wished to hire the town hall for their launch, heaven forbid that you'd fill it up, but you could do it quite happily under our... I thought there was a rule that you can't use elected member can't use a venue of the Hobart City Council during an election campaign. I wonder if that could be checked out in an answer in writing to us all, but because it seems to me that there might be some not sure about that.
You, Lord Mayor, I stand to be corrected, but there is a policy around advertising on council property. That you can't, erect the corflute signs on council land. I must say, I'm not aware of any restrictions on the use of the venues, but look, I will take it on notice and follow up.
So if you did hire the town hall for the launch of your campaign, you couldn't have corflute signs or signs in the venue. That's good, yes. And I'm not doubting what you've said, but I would like it in writing. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Any further discussion? I'll put, Alderman Barrass.
I'm sorry, Lord Mayor, but Alderman Briscoe's questions prompted a question from myself. Just on that same provision about council committees and groups, when we're talking about external groups, how are we defining that? I just want to make sure that this is properly worded.
It says council committee,
Or appointment as a member of an external group. Would it be perhaps tidier to have it as an official appointment? Because would that potentially capture somebody who's been asked to join a member of a completely third-party group that's not officially connected to council?
I think the intent was meant to be one of those council committees.
Because it says council committee, but then says external group, so that's why I'm asking the question.
Or through you, Lord Mayor, a council appointed member of those groups. So an individual who is a member of any group has that freedom, but if the person is acting as a council appointed member, I think that's when this policy would apply.
Okay.
So that could be entered as a edit, the words council appointed member.
Oh yeah, or officially appointed or something. But
Yeah.
because the intent of this isn't to, like if I get invited onto a working group completely in my own right, that wouldn't be affected by this. And I think that's maybe an important distinction so that people don't say, oh, you're Alderman Barrakas or Councillor Harvey or whatever's on the member of this committee, and they're using that for, it's completely separate to council. Perhaps that's just a suggestion.
And I think that can be noted by the staff, doesn't need to be re-amended, or an amendment. Any further discussion?
I know that, I'm sorry that this, I was at the workshop and, but I just wonder with the objectives, I know that we're talking about the election caretaker period, but the purpose of this policy in Part A says major policy decisions are not made by council in the lead up to an election. Can we just say, can we have that as in the caretaker period? Because lead up to an election, obviously, we've been in lead up to an election for a very, very, very long time already.
Too long.
So could we just define that in that as an edit?
That makes sense.
Yeah, thank you.
That can be again, I think that's fine.
I think,
It's just clarification.
I think through you, Lord Mayor, those objectives and this policy applies only to that caretaker period.
Yeah, but I think it doesn't hurt to put that in.
Out.
Okay, any further discussion? I'll put that. All those in favour say aye. Against say no. Carried unanimously. We now move to the closed portion of the meeting. So, we will, once it's been moved. Moved by Deputy Lord Mayor, seconded by Alderman Barrakas. All those in favour say aye. Against say no. Carried unanimously. And we'll now close the meeting.